Thank you for staying with us. We're still talking a little bit of economics, but I had this tweet coming from Alabi Michael, who says, incidences of rape are also witnessed in affluent climes with more stringent legislations. He says it's important to have strict laws and enforcement to curb the rate. Also, educating minors, limiting their interactions with strict monitoring of their movement will help. That's coming from Alabi Michael.
Well, he's got merit. Well, let's move on with Sunrise, and we'll be looking at revamping the economy. SMEs to the rescue. Are they really to the rescue? We've spoken about this a few times during this pandemic, and even though we always say that they are the fuel that really runs the economy, how much support are SMEs getting in this country to help them really perform their role? The crash in global oil prices and the economic fallout of the coronavirus pandemic has posed a threat to the economy of Nigeria, which is Africa's largest economy and the biggest producer of crude oil in the region. But the federal government is doing its best. Well,
so it says.
Some people will say its best is not good enough, but it is doing something to rejig the economy. For instance, only the course of this last week, the National Assembly gave the president approval for what some consider a huge loan, a venture into which we shouldn't have gone at this time. But then, what do I know? We've got experts with us in the studio who are going to talk to us more about this and how SMEs can actually come to the rescue of our economy at this time. We have an economist, Mr. Gospel Obele.
Thank you for
morning.
having me.
And we also have a communication strategist, Mr. Ayodele Adio.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you both for coming this
Thank you
morning.
for your time. Appreciate it.
Let's start with that loan. 5.1 billion, we're told, from 2 or 3 different areas. And that is to deal with the effects of the pandemic, with the fall in oil prices. And we're looking at how to now fund our budget, the 2020 budget. Now, do you think that this is a good time to be borrowing that kind of money?
Well, across the world, there's a lot of borrowing and stimulus packages at the moment. But for Nigeria, it's quite a different case in a sense, because borrowing that kind of money when you don't have the structural things in place, to contain that and then to use those funds for what they should be used for is a major challenge, because it just means that you're trying to fetch water in a basket. So, and if you look at the expenditure spread, our deficit is larger, not necessarily because we're doing more on the capital end, but because there's a high recurrent side and there's also a high, cost of governance. So, and then you have institutions who do not have the capacity, to use and deploy these funds strategically, for the reasons why they should be used for. So, yes, borrowing and stimulus packages, we already have that going on around the world now, but because we do not have the structural balancing and there is a long history of fiscal indiscipline, these two particularly puts us in a situation where we may not get the most out of these loans.
But Gospel, in the same breath, we're asking for debt cancellation.
Yeah, I mean, that was also what happened in 2004. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala led that delegation, and then we luckily were able to have 60% of our debt cancelled. Now we are back to where we were and further worse down the line. And that's strictly because of one thing, fiscal indiscipline across board. And this is not an administration issue. It cuts across. So we're not so much of the people who are accountable. We're not so much of people who put funds in the right priorities. We don't invest in what is right for us, looking at it in terms of short, mid, and long term and all that. And then ensuring that there's a rigorous process around improvements and development and the likes. So it's quite pathetic, but it's the situation we find ourselves in.
Our system is such that we're loaded with a lot of small and medium-scale enterprises. But these loans that are being collected by the federal government or at different levels may not necessarily get to them. Even revamping the economy may not necessarily affect them. Or do you think so? Do you think it will? Because there are those who believe that they are actually the main solution to the Nigerian economy?
I mean, it's not a matter of what people believe, it's the reality. You have about 41 million small and medium businesses in Nigeria. They account for 48% of our GDP, and they employ about 84% of the labor in your country. So they are quite a necessary part of the economy of our country. And if you let them sink, you would have your economy in the gutters at the end of the day. The problem, like he rightfully highlighted, which stems from a lot of indiscipline, is the fact that over the years, you have not collected enough data. So the country hardly knows or has an idea of where these businesses are located, what these businesses do, and how they operate. So it's difficult to target your stimulus package to what you do not understand, and what you can't measure, you can't change or you can't fix. So if you look at how the stimulus package operated in America when they injected the first stimulus package, which has resulted into 2.5 million jobs created just last month, the data clearly showed that 1.9 million of those jobs were from food, restaurants, and those kind of businesses generally. So it is driven by data, driven by an understanding of the reality of these small businesses, and then you can provide support in that regard. The problem here is there is really no understanding of the businesses in the country. We have no data guiding our policy. And here we are. I mean, we've put 50 billion in Israel, the microfinance bank, but you have businesses, tons of businesses struggling to access that funds. And therein lies the problem.
Is it not a question of proper accounting and accountability? Because even Guston mentioned that we're not an accounting people. Don't you think that's one of the reasons why they're unable to access these funds? Because the government will tell you that the funds are there for them to access.
Well, I mean, that may play a role, because a large number, because here, I said 41 million small and medium businesses. 90+% of that number are micro businesses, and over 70% of that micro businesses are in the informal sector. They don't pay taxes, their businesses are not registered, they are not properly regulated. So to that extent, it might be difficult for them to access those kinds of funds. But the idea again is, if you live in the country, if you are in government in the country where you realize that a great number of the small businesses in your country are informal, you should know that, and you should know how to target those businesses. And so many smart FinTech companies are doing that from your smartphone, you can borrow 20, 50, 30, 100,000 naira by just sending a sort code. And that's how some of these small businesses have operated over time. They've never been to a banking hall. They just send a sort code, and their accounts are credited, and they do business. So it's that kind of knowledge-driven policy that you want from the center of government, where you know where these businesses are, you know how they operate, and then you can support them.
Okay, we'll take a short break. When we'll come back, we'll look at how this, what they call it now, stimulus can get to the SMEs. I mean, some European countries are giving as much as 15,000 euros to small and medium enterprises. We'll be back in a moment. Please stay with us.
As have been seen since the presidential task force in COVID-19 started, the provisions of most of its guidelines have always allowed state government to apply those as suits their peculiarities. As part of the guidelines to open the economy, and in this case for markets, the Lagos state government announced some measures for compliance. 1. Compulsory wearing of face masks in public places. 2. Provision of hand-washing facility or the option of hand-based sanitizers. 3. Social distancing. And 4, but not the least, healthy handling of food items and goods. So we set out to monitor the level of compliance at some markets in Lagos. The open markets are almost back to business as usual. Food items are in open display, poor hygiene, and handling of items and foods with bare hands. This is one of the reasons why face masks have been recommended. Watch this young man interaction and how he suddenly sneezes into the air with no precautions. To a bit of a more organized and gated environment, the computer village, owing to its controlled associations, have ensured some level of compliance. They've talked to their members, but argue it may be difficult to control the sea of heads milling around the market. We can only enforce compliance when people come to our shops, they say.
We advise our business people, our colleagues, to reduce, to change this style of their workers, maybe shifting. Some of them on shifting basis. They don't come every day because we advise them not to sack anybody.
Save for a reduced number of days of opening, nothing suggests any social distancing on the streets, at the banks, at the markets, and nearly all public places have been thrown into life as it was in the beginning. Again, in the name of nose mask wearing or covering of the nose and the mouth, what we have seen a lot of people do is this. They just put it under their jaw, and you begin to wonder what exactly is it covering, the beards like now I'm doing, or the mouth and the nose. Some even argue just open the entire system, as nothing seemed to have been restrictive with the partial ease down.
If you want to give us 3 days, you give us full day. If you want to give us 5 days, you give us full day. This half day is not helping us at all.
Whatever it takes to really combat the pandemic still remains the superior argument. Olu Phillips, Channels Television News.
Thank you for staying with us. We have Gospel Bele, who's an economist, and Adele Adio, a communication strategist. And before we went on that break, Adio, you were talking about the number of SMEs in Nigeria. And I also mentioned that in some climes, like in some European countries, they are given as much as 15,000 euros as a stimulus package to this company. And Alera said something about that, the fact that they pay taxes. I mean, the barber shop got 15,000 euros. Someone sent that video to me. But Gospel, do you think that can happen in our shores if indeed the SMEs are going to help boost our economy?
So I would first of all want to state that SMEs in their element as individual components do not necessarily boost the economy. What you have is a situation where you have a cluster of thriving SMEs, right? So we need a cluster of thriving SMEs to be able to add value to the economy, not individual-based SMEs. So yeah, it can be individual-based SMEs that can literally grow into corporations and the likes, but they must be thriving at a level before they can impact on. Yes, so exactly. So that's the question. So how do we get them thriving? Now, you talked about the 15,000 euros and the likes. If you look at the challenge very well in this climate, to a large extent, it's shared, right? So yes, he mentioned that the government doesn't even have data, they don't even know who these SMEs are and where they are and what they do. And also you have a situation where you have about 60% informal. You know, the economy is largely 60% informal. Then on the other hand, you have a situation where SMEs themselves have a part of the role they play in that challenge, right? So the accounting, the structure, and all of that necessary to access these funds is another challenge. Then you have a third arm, the banks / the institutions who give out these loans or these form of stimulus packages, wherever we want to look at it. We find out that majority of them who sit behind it does not even have a good understanding about how, you know, Nigerian businesses operate or what it means to do business in this climate. So the challenge is shared, and until we begin to deal with them in different components, and then trying to tie them up strategically, and then ensure that a lot of SMEs are being moved into the productive economy mainstream, we may not be able to have that kind of rescue impact on the Nigerian economy.
We say SMEs to the rescue, and I'm just wondering, how can they come to the rescue when probably 30–40% of them have gone under due to the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it's a serious challenge. A lot of businesses have gone under, have folded up. Unfortunately, again, we go back to the very basis, which is the fact that we don't even know what kind of businesses have gone under. We don't know the number of businesses that have gone under. And so it's very difficult, you know, to formulate a policy response.
Are we going to know in time? Any hope of us knowing?
I mean, who knows? The only credible data we can get from this country is the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. And they've been starved of funds. Maybe if they have enough funding, and I would suggest that the private sector should support the funding of the NBS, because the data that they generate is valuable input for their planning and business decision making. So maybe when that happens, we can have an idea of the gravity of this crisis, to know what kinds of businesses have gone down, how many businesses have gone over, how many people have lost their livelihoods, how many people have lost their jobs. Then we can begin to prepare a response to that. At the moment, I think we're just playing guesswork. We're not sure what we're doing. We just assume. Of course, there are certain industries that we know that have been badly hit, which is the hospitality. Hotels can't operate, restaurants can't operate, barbershops, cannot operate. Those small service businesses have been badly hit and they cannot operate. But here's the thing. There is no specific targeted policy on the hospitality business in Nigeria. These people have been shut down for 3 months and very little attention has been given to them. They employ lots of people, same as transport, same as food and beverage. So it's a difficult situation when you are not using data to drive policy making. And let me emphasize this. I see again that every policy has to be crafted, articulated, and implemented by the federal government. There are 36 other federating units and subnational governments. What are they doing? These are the people in their states who have a better understanding of these businesses, who understand the local peculiarities. Where is their own stimulus package? What are they doing to support businesses in their own? Everybody's just going cap in hand, waiting for the federal government to break bread so that they can share.
Yeah, but that's going to come to an end pretty soon. How much is oil today? So what is being shared in the center is dwindling. So are you seeing any kind of positive action from the states regarding being self-sufficient?
If you take out Lagos and a few other states, maybe Port Harcourt, just a few other states, you have so many states that are insolvent. They will not survive without handouts from the federal government. Unfortunately, most of these states have not started making the very difficult decision of diversifying their economy or becoming self-sufficient or becoming independent of the federal government's largesse. And that's the problem that we have. And we allow too much planning to be done in Abuja, whereas we abandon subnational governments where the people actually live. The Minister of Finance, for instance, or the person in charge of economic planning in Abuja does not have the luxury to know what happens in the business community in Potiskum, in Yobe. Doesn't have the idea on ground of what happens in Aba Market. These are people that your commissioners of economic planning in those states have a better understanding of those local peculiarities and should form policies that will support these businesses. But that is not happening at the moment. There is this over-dependence on oil such that, here's the funny thing I say every time. 36 commissioners of budget planning go to Abuja every month to hold a meeting, not for economic planning, not for policy alignment, but to collect money and go back home. What a waste of human resources that these bright brains go to Abuja not to strategically plan for economic development, but to collect and go.
But if that be the case, if the state and the federal are not, those who should be thinking and planning, are not planning the policy direction for these small and medium enterprises or the micro enterprises, as the case may be, what's the hope then?
I strongly think that in the meantime, SMEs would need to take the bull by the horn by themselves. But what we have is, you mentioned earlier on that a lot of SMEs have gone under. And it's majorly because of a particular issue, and that's inability to access markets, all right? Inability to understand markets. So if... sorry. Yeah.
Inability to access markets,
to understand
not
and
access funds.
No, first of all, understand and access markets. Now, the Enterprise Development Center released a report on the impact of COVID-19 on SMEs. And we realized 75% of SMEs said that, yes, business have gone under, incomes are not coming as usual, but they feel they need funds to move ahead. And that's what the conversation has been. How do we create more stimulus and how do we channel more funds to this market? But if you look at SMEs, I'm an SME too, but to be very objective here, if you look at SMEs, they don't even have a good knowledge about what is going on in the first place. Then to be able to tell exactly from a CEO point of view or a CEO point of view how bad your sector or your business or your market is hit, until you can do that robust business review, all right, about your market, understand where the market currently is at the moment as a result of COVID-19, you may not necessarily be able to articulate what you need, and what resource you may need. You may need a form of human capital resource or financial resource and all that. And so there have been a lot of overemphasis on access to fund. Funding is very important, but funding is a strategic tool, right? When you understand your market enough to know how to apply it. And if you don't understand your market enough to apply it, you can as well get as much funds and then it sinks it down the drain. All right, so I think it has to do with a challenge of understanding markets. A lot of SMEs don't pay attention to that. Private sector organizations who do a lot of SME work in form of CSR, in form of an extension of what they do, hardly deal with the market angle of SMEs. So yes, little talks here and there about structure, but about 90% conversation has been on funding. So how do you fund what you don't understand? And how do you fund what you cannot monitor or evaluate as time progresses or as the global/local economy changes? Very critical.
Some people, some bodies that have funds to give, some banks, for instance, they make the rules for access so stringent that not many of those SMEs will actually qualify.
You mean access to funding?
Yes.
Yes, so I mentioned earlier on that challenge is shared. So if you look at the requirements in quotes, a lot of times those requirements are not built with an understanding of how it is to do business in Nigeria. So a lot of bankers and people who sit behind those funding desks in the commercial banks and the likes don't even understand how to run businesses. So they build the criteria for people who, I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say. So, and then you have businesses who do not have, the structure and all that it will take to access this funding. And even if you have the two working, there's a lot of compromise here and there, but at least let's have those two working. We do not have that at the moment, So it's going to take a lot of reworking each component of that value chain to ensure that, and those also state here again that the EDC report stated that a lot of SMEs are hopeful and resilient that their business will survive. But in the times we are in, resilience is not enough. And being hopeful or being passionate is not enough. That must meet with clarity and intelligence as regards what is evolving, how it's evolving, and where does my business model fit in the middle of this dynamics, as it were, and what resources would I need to scale. And let me also state that there are businesses who have the potential of surviving this period that may still fail because they cannot, SMEs in Nigeria have not been taught to do the rigorous work of intelligence gathering.
But some time ago, when banks were told to reserve a certain amount of their profit for SMEs, there was plenty of marketing going on, and some banks actually came and sat here and told us how they were going around trying to get people to access those funds and how they were going to market women in Qatar, for instance, who sold fabrics, and trying to explain to them how they could access these funds. So is there hope that there'll be proper marketing? Because now that SMEs have gone under, there'll be many SMEs who would want to come back into business, who will be looking for funding. So do you see banks going on aggressive marketing to try and get these SMEs to access some of these funds?
The experience has been when they go out of those marketing so that you can open accounts, service those accounts for 6 months, and they put you ladder tall criteria for you to access funds, and you end up crying at the end of the day, which you don't get. So the entire business model.
Banks, please take note, please listen and learn.
I mean, that's the reality on ground. If you've done business in Nigeria, you will know that. The entire business model is not built on lending. Most of their profits do not come from that. In fact, there is too much risk for banks to lend to entrepreneurs. When
in parentheses, did you hear about 3-4 days ago that banks made 2.2 billion from bank charges? No, account maintenance fees.
Exactly. So, so they and there's lower risk in investing in government securities than there are in borrowing SMEs. So even though the CBN has taken a very, very important decision to lower the MPR rates, which is the money policy rate, to 12.5%, which is essentially supposed to allow banks to borrow more to the SMEs, you are not likely to see the graph go up in terms of borrowing to SMEs because fundamentally,
Lending.
yes, you're not going to see them lend more monies out because these banks are not their internal mechanism is not designed to lend monies to small businesses. So what needs to happen, hopefully, is that we're out of time. Oh.
We're out of time, but just round up.
So I think what needs to happen is is to follow the intelligence of these fintech companies. And I keep hammering on that because somehow they understand the market better than banks that have operated here for decades. They know who to borrow to, they know how to borrow to, and they lower the barriers of entry, you know, for these things to happen. So I think if you want to form a policy right from at a strategic level from the federal government, coordinated with state governments, is to find ways at which monies can get to these small businesses without having to go through these bureaucratic bottlenecks that they usually go through, where from the first paper that is dropped in front of you, when you see the 20 sheets, you don't even know where to start filling these forms from. And that way we can get more monies in the hands of SMEs and hopefully stimulate the economy.
We have out of time. We don't even have time to take your final word on this. I'm very, very sorry. We've been speaking with Gospel Obele, who's an economist, and Ayodele Adio, a communication strategist. Thank you for coming to share your thoughts with us about revamping the economy, which is something that this country badly needs because there's so many people who are out of employment right now because so many of these SMEs have gone under. Thank you very much. Sunrise will be right back in a moment with the home stretch.